you can't show up with humility, true humility, unless you really have nothing to prove.
Humble's not a weak thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's a deeply powerful thing, I think, in the hands of someone who really understands that they're stewards.
The more our confidence comes from our understanding of who we are in Christ, the more peace we have, the more ease that we carry ourselves with. And because it's this idea that it's not thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking of ourselves less.
Hey guys, welcome back to Journey to Easter. I'm Liz Diddy, pastor for Venture Women, and I'm here with my co-host, Chuck Eastman, who oversees all of our adult ministries. And today on the couch, we've got Chris Rutz. Chris, how's it going?
Amazing. It's great to be here, yeah.
All right. For those who have not been able to have the chance to meet you yet, what have you been doing here this week?
Yeah. If you don't know who I am, I'm the head of school here at Venture Christian Academy. And it's a super busy time of year because, we are in admission season. We're also in accreditation season. So we just received a 6-year accreditation term. It's a really exciting time in the life of the school. And also I moved here a year and a half ago. If there's anybody who hasn't met me yet, I've got a wife that I've been married for 30 years to. It's hard to believe. And we have 2 beautiful kids.
Amazing. Yeah, awesome. Well, welcome. And I know that there's a lot of really exciting things going on at the school right now. This week in our reading, we looked a lot at humility and servanthood and what that looked like with Jesus as obviously a super strong leader, king of the universe, and looking at the way that he wore humility. How do you guys think about showing up in Silicon Valley as leaders in your field, and what does the humility of Jesus look like in your jobs?
Yeah. In humility, I'll let you go first, Chuck.
Well, I was going to say age before beauty. No. Actually, I was thinking, Chris, I'd love to hear just in the education world, you're kind of investing in people and the goal is that they perform. It seems like humility would be an interesting subject to address in terms of leading in the educational space.
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually really a central part to teaching our kids what kind of humans we're supposed to be as Christians. And I think that fleshes out in a couple of ways. One, absolutely excellence is a part of what we aspire to embody as a school. And we want our kids to be great at everything they do. So we do maintain a high level of excellence in our academic programs, and we want to foster that in our kids. The second part of that, of course, is understanding, well, what does it mean to be like Jesus and how to live that out? We were talking about this beforehand, right? Is just understanding how do we embody Christ in that excellence so that it is a beautiful reflection of who he is and not so much a reflection just of who we are and our competence and try to impress the world.
Man, that's awesome. I think humility is it's like a hard thing to get your hands around because it's like, I think we all know we're supposed to be humble, but like how that plays out, I think is still something I'm trying to figure out because you can be humble, you can act humble, but not be humble, or you can be self-deprecating and think that's being humble. I find there's it's just difficult sometimes to figure out how you actually like step into being this confident, but like laying down your life kind of humble that we see in Jesus.
I think it's kind of the opposite of, obviously pride. And, I always think about, when's the last time you read Mere Christianity, right? C.S. Lewis, chapter 8, I always refer to people as if you want to read some of the best, refined writing on understanding, the chief sin of mankind is pride. And he says in that chapter, all of our other sins are wrapped up in, some element of our own pride.
Yeah.
And so, as I think about that conversation about excellence, right? The idea is, can we aspire to do all things with excellence for God's glory? And the idea is that it reflects God's beauty and not sort of for the purpose of advancing ourselves.
Yeah. I like that you brought up pride because I think some good friends in the past like helped me see like that pride is just one side of the coin, and the other side is insecurity,
Hmm.
and that sometimes pride comes across as confidence, but it's really a projection of feeling kind of inadequate around certain areas, and that humility is kind of the other side of like true confidence.
Hmm.
Is that when you have kind of that sense of like knowing who you are, knowing how you move through the world, you're able to be humble. And that helps me kind of at least ferret that out a little bit, is the thing I'm stepping out in and doing or saying, is it trying to fill that hole
Yeah.
where I don't feel whole, I don't feel right, I don't feel complete.
Hmm.
And so I speak out, do I not feel smart? So I project that I'm smart. Do I not feel strong? So I overproject being strong. Whereas when I feel complete in those ways, when I feel like I'm healthy in those ways, it's a lot easier to not take things personal when people say things.
Yeah.
Try to hear critique. To me, that's when I know that someone gives me critique, but I can really own it and listen to it. I feel like, oh, like there's a level of confidence that actually lets me hear that now.
Yeah.
But those are just some of the things that at least are the smoke of letting me know, like, where am I at?
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody carries their insecurities to some degree or another. But I was also thinking about, was that in your office like a week or two ago? We were looking at this little Keller book,
Yeah, a little
The
book.
Art. What is it? No, it's
The freedom of self-forgetfulness.
Yeah.
Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness. Another
Liz
highly
Day
recommended
gave me
read.
that book. I don't know if she was
Okay.
sending me a message.
Yeah.
But, first week here, she's like, I have a book for you.
Just for light reading. Just
Yeah.
whenever you get around to it in
Yeah,
the next couple days.
He hasn't read it.
I haven't. That's right. Unfortunately,
You haven't read it yet.
I haven't read it yet.
Chuck, it's like 49 pages. I mean, let's
know.
get to it. It is actually a sermon, but what I love about it is it really is talking about this. Is the more our confidence comes from our understanding of who we are in Christ, the more peace we have, the more ease that we carry ourselves with. And because it's this idea that it's not thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking of ourselves less.
Well, and I think there's this fear of humility, right? Of that humility is weakness, right? And that humility shows up as weakness, especially if you're around a table and there's, power is on the table. I think that's one of the primary misunderstandings about humility is that it is confidence. Can you imagine? I mean, you can't show up with humility, true humility, unless you really have nothing to prove.
Yeah.
And there is tremendous power in showing up somewhere and not needing to prove yourself to who's in that room.
And that's remarkable. It's almost hard to imagine. I think there's always a little bit of that in my system when I, even in my best, maybe the spaces I feel the best in, I feel like there's still a little bit of like this thing that's driving me to like show myself, prove myself. It's hard to like let that go and say, hey, I want to come and serve.
We all have those voices. And I think especially in our area where we have some of probably the most driven people in the world whose ambition has served them really, really well.
Yeah.
I mean, we've created incredible things.
Yeah.
Oh, there are people just building amazing, amazing things in all sorts of different industries and fields. And so how do you guys think about just sort of the fear of that tension between humility and ambition, of, sitting back and driving hard, of hustle and humble? How do you see those actually playing out so that people still perform with excellence and drive to the full thing of their capabilities and yet, can show up without having to feel like they have to run at 1,000%?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, Jesus had the biggest mission in human history, and it was the most important mission. And he said the way to accomplish that mission wasn't to do what many Jewish leaders had done before him, which is they were trying to fight back Rome and build their armies. And by not doing that, by actually coming in and creating a culture of serving and laying down their life, it's the only movement we know of that we really talk about from the first century.
So upside down.
Yeah, there were so many people that led really successful campaigns, but then they ended. And they died with their leader. And we actually know of Jesus, and the world knows of Jesus because he taught 12 guys what it looked like to serve.
And a larger circle of
That's
other
right.
men and women that followed his teaching.
That's right.
As well.
That's exactly right.
This is really a central focus of who we are in Silicon Valley, right? This really highly accomplished place. And yet it's been super cool for me to come, because I moved here from Southern California a year and a half ago, right? Where there's also a lot of like image driven sort of stuff that happens down there too. But I think the key that I go back to always, and trying to be a Christian in this environment, or like seeking after what we really want to be, the people that God's created us to be, is really about identity. And what is our identity? And it's not in our achievement, right? And so it doesn't negate that we don't aspire to great things, but we don't find our identity in those things. And I can get wrapped up in that. It's like we're building a school, and we have a big vision for the school. And it's kind of been that's been my life's work, is building schools. And we've had a lot of success, but like, that's not my identity.
Yeah.
My identity is in who I am as a follower and a lover of Jesus. I think the more you take care of that stuff, the more natural the way you live out your faith in all that success. It drives an authenticity that I think is beautiful to the world. Because if you keep that the main thing, then, I think people sniff out authenticity, and like the depth to which you're pursuing the Lord. It becomes, that's what's really driving who you are, and people sense that. I really believe that.
Yeah. I feel like we're using, I don't know, I feel like we're using words like humility and, Jesus was humble. Yes, like we saw in our reading, he washed his disciples' feet. But what does humility actually look like? Have you seen it play out in someone else's life? Or what does it feel like in your own life have you had a choice recently where you chose to choose? I know it kind of sounds like humble brag to pop about it now, but I'm giving you full permission. Just to give us an example of like, what does humility look like with skin on?
I was hoping you'd give me a chance to tell everybody how humble I am. I'm incredibly humble. If that's say, Joe.
When I was applying for this job 4 years ago, and we came to a winter wonderland. It was freezing cold, I remember. I mean, it was so cold. And
we're back in Missouri. How freezing cold was it?
I mean, it was pretty cold. I walked on to the campus, me and my wife did, and we were applying for this job at this big church. I was coming from a pretty small church, actually, that I'd been serving at, and had mostly served in small churches. So Venture is like huge, right? And so Tim, as the guy, who I wanted to hire me, it was like a big deal to me. And I saw Tim carrying the buckets of hot chocolate, the containers for hot chocolate, coming down the stairs. And I thought, I think that's the lead pastor.
Yeah.
And he just had these huge things of hot chocolate. He was right when coming down the stairs, and I saw him put them down. I thought, well, that's interesting. And he turned around and ran up the stairs again. And then I just watched, and sure enough, he came out again. And apparently they'd had a problem that year with where they were getting their water. And so Tim was having to carry it up like 2 flights of stairs all the way back up to the kitchen because he couldn't fill it up down somewhere else. And I saw him do that the whole night. And I thought, that's a leader I'd want to serve.
Yeah.
And when I came on staff and we did Winter Wonderland, he's always preaching the next morning. We are usually having to beg him to stop rolling up bouncy castles with us and go home, because he's going to get up and preach 3 services the next day. Man, it just makes it really easy to follow him and to serve him in those ways. And also, like, think when the teams that we lead, like, how can I serve them in those ways, and not to ask them to go do or clean things that I wouldn't go and clean with them. I think has been something that I've learned from working with Tim.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking about this recent conversation too. That's so true about Tim. There's no airs about him. And yet, like, here he's the leader of this really, really influential church here in our community. But
Tim is going to hate this.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
sorry,
wrap
Tim.
it
We're
up.
blowing you up. But it is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of really influential people that go to our church and listen to this podcast, perhaps. And as you scale that, I think about the story that we just heard about. Tim shared about Tim Keller,
Yeah.
Do you remember him talking about that?
In our staff lunch.
Yeah. He said that, he went for a number of years to an event at his church, a seminar in New York, something. And Tim Keller is like one of the absolute foremost leaders in, Christian, the Christian conversation in America. And he just said, he spoke with such ease and authenticity with, just the people in his church, some guy who doesn't have any, standing really in society. And he's like listening to them, taking notes, engaging. And that made me so happy because Keller's such a hero of mine, but I would have guessed that, right? Whereas like some, big personality leaders don't always embody that. It's like what you experience in person is like, maybe not the same kind of.
Totally.
So that's humility in leadership.
I'm hearing that humility looks like being with people instead, not thinking that you're only with the people of your level,
I love that.
but that and man, how many times have you been at something and the person you're talking with is like looking over your shoulder for someone who's more worth talking to?
Absolutely.
I think there's something about treating everyone like they're worth being with.
Yeah.
That shows that you don't think of yourself as too important for other people.
100%.
There's something about not having no job too small, of like no work that you're above, of like being able to get your hands dirty, which really literally is Jesus washing feet is like our modern day rolling up a sweaty bouncy cancel.
That's right.
And then there's that just posture of showing up with nothing to prove and having your identity, like you were talking about, Chris, so rooted in Christ that other people around you can bluster and puff up their chests and be as loud as they want, but you are as certain of who you are and what you have to offer that you don't have to peacock the same way as everyone else.
Yeah, that's really good.
Am I missing anything?
No, I
I
think it's really good.
that.
You'd asked earlier about like ambition and humility. A guy named Patrick Lencioni, I think you guys have probably heard of him, but they got a lot of data-driven stuff around leadership.
Yeah.
And basically, he wrote a book called The Ideal Team Player. And he basically said that the data shows that your ideal team player in a corporate, it is all from the corporate world, is humble and also hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Basically saying if you got someone on your team and they're not humble, they're not teachable, they're like above certain things, they're always looking to just like, they don't want to be with anyone below their level, kind of thing, then they could blow up your team.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're also not hungry, if they don't have a drive in them that's saying, man, how can we do it at an excellent level? What can we how to do to pull up all the stops? What else can I learn that helps us get to where we want to be? He says it'll blow up your team. If you have somebody who's just kind of complacent. And I think sometimes this conversation comes around and we go, oh, the humble person isn't ambitious. They're actually kind of complacent. They're kind of just, whatever. It's like you actually need those two things pulling together for that person to really, I think, be a valuable member to the team.
Yeah.
And that's really helped me, I think, to see that they're not in competition.
Yeah. I don't think anyone would call Jesus lazy. I mean,
They're quite the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And, like you said, he had the most significant task.
It wasn't weak. It wasn't weak either. You've got the examples where he really flexes coming into the temple. You got him, one of our passages was him calming the storm and saying to the disciples, why are you guys afraid? I'm here. So it's humble's not a weak thing.
Yeah.
It's a deeply powerful thing, I think, in the hands of someone who really understands that they're stewards of what God's given them.
Well, and the truth is that, you were talking about C.S. Lewis and pride. It can be such an invisible sin in our own lives. It can be such a blind spot to us. We don't even really know when we're acting out of it.
100%.
But it's a real good clue to us when we start getting, like when we start feeling like other people are stepping on our toes, or like when we start feeling our own ego be really fragile, or our own insecurities start to flare into jealousy, or
that's right,
ruminating over feeling, like the victim or rejected or whatever it is. And that's just because our sense of self is so weak.
Or you can't celebrate somebody else's win. You ever felt that before? someone like gets a win, gets an opportunity, something happens, and you can't celebrate it.
Yeah.
You can't honor it.
Yeah.
Someone's good at something, but you never feel like you can be like, oh, Chris, that was awesome, because you somehow feel like when you do that, it's taking away
Yeah.
your mic,
It's
your
natural
voice.
human emotion inside. Yeah.
And then I think there's too, we see all around us, and Jesus's time too, right? Like Herod is flexing his power. He's taking John the Baptist's head. There are people around him who are proud, who are powerful, who, the Pharisees try to, put the weight of the temple and the crowds behind themselves. And it can be tempting to look at that and feel like, man, like I would love to be like Jesus. I would love to be humble, but you just don't understand the people who are around me.
Mm.
If I did that, I would just get walked over.
Totally.
I would just lose. What do you have to say to someone like that? It's hard to be humble when there's jerks around and like jerk behavior is rewarded in your culture.
Mm.
Tim shared this in Better Man, our men's ministry, here probably a month ago, but he said people think that, but the data shows that the people who show up to serve for the good of the team are always the ones that get promoted. The people who show up, who really work the edges to be like, how can I help you win? What do you need? Those are the people that end up being both get promoted, but also the people you want to work for.
Mm.
And so I think we believe that, but I actually think the data might support showing up actually more like Jesus showed up in those spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where like you can get caught up in that. It's like, okay, well then I need to keep pace with that, or I need to figure out how to posture and position. I think there's a lot of different kinds of leaders even in corporate world that have different personalities that aren't that way, right? And so part of it is just like it's a lifelong pursuit to really understand what that looks like.
Yeah.
Confidence and kindness, but also an assertive strength. I think you can carry yourself in a way that still is absolutely a very, I don't want to say imposing figure, but a very strong.
Commanding.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, if somebody's getting ahead, that's where you also have to have a certain amount of trust that like, I'm going to conduct myself in a manner that I know is worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And we're constantly trying to figure out what does that look like? But if we don't get ahead in whatever it is that we were grasping for or hoping for, can we trust that God still has good things and he will work that out?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think sometimes we have such a short-term view,
Yeah.
like I just
Mm-hmm.
long term, those things do oftentimes burn themselves out, burn them up. Well, I'm thinking about just as I'm going into this week and how easy it is to be blind to my own pride, what it would look like to sort of take those takeaways of humility and to see someone who I may not have otherwise looked for and let them feel seen by me
That's good.
and to truly see them myself, not just for them, but for me. To do something that maybe I wouldn't otherwise want to do, but I can show up as an act of love for someone else, even if it feels sacrificial to me. To talk to Jesus about what it looks like to show up in some of the spaces where I still feel like I have something to prove and actually step into those without my identity being on the line, but being fully loved by God.
I love that.
I think
This is your life application. Hopefully our listeners are taking something away and going, I'm going to try that this week. Really focus on that.
let's try it out.
Let's go.
Let's figure out what humility feels like.
Yeah, I love that.
Because I think it has something for us. It's not just something we're supposed to be or something we're supposed to do. It's an invitation in the way of Jesus.
That's right.
Which is always the better way.
It's beautiful.
That's so good.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for journeying along with us to Easter. We will see you next week. Hopefully we see you in the app. We've got lots of comments, questions, journals going on, and we always appreciate seeing your names pop up. Have a great week.